Welcome, everybody, to the PFF College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Galina. I am alongside my two best friends in the whole world, Diante Lee and Anthony Treash. And we have a very interesting episode to get to you guys, whoever's listening. We got some interesting stuff we're going to talk about at first on some stuff that we've all kind of been researching separately and working on. And then we're going to get into the top 10 returning outside cornerback tandems in college football. So what's up, guys? Okay, good. We're all having a good time. I
was going to give Diante the floor because
I'm the new guy, right? I'm the new guy. I'm doing
newly implemented into the full-time cult here. We have going.
Yeah. I'm very glad to be, part of the PFF family on a full-time basis. This is definitely going to be a good time. And I know that the podcast is going to continue to grow, and so I'm looking forward to what that's going to be in the future as well.
Josh, how's Cincy?
It's dandy. It's a wonderful time down here. I will say that.
All right. So yeah, let's get right into it. Like I said, we all have three things that we've been really into the past few weeks. So I guess I'll start with Diante. You are writing. We're going NFL to start. So I apologize to our only college football listeners, but you are writing an article and you're researching dime defenses in the NFL. So can you, 10,000 foot view, explain what's going on?
Yeah. So it's actually fun. I'm wearing this NBA shirt because, and not to give away exactly what I'm doing in the article, but the kind of parallel I'm drawing is to the way that I think basketball fans think about small ball and the way that it's used and the kind of misconceptions that we have about things like that, So the number one thing to understand about dime is that it's still very specialized, in terms of a package defensively. Like the Packers are the only team in the NFL that played it on more than 10% of their snaps. So we're still talking about a very small kind of handful of plays, and only 17 teams played more than 100 total snaps in dime throughout the season. So then it just becomes a matter of what are teams in the NFL getting in dime to do? So there's a certain subset of teams that get into dime to do the same stuff that they always do in their base and their nickel stuff. They're just doing it with better coverage players. So then you're kind of looking at okay, well, do the bodies match up? So an example is Green Bay. I think that a lot of Green Bay fans have been able to point out the fact that they have very significant deficiencies in stopping the run when they're in dime, and the numbers hold that up. Then there are other teams like your Kansas Cities and your Titans that get into dime, and they're doing that to turn the pressure way up or play extremely soft coverage and try to jump inside of windows to force turnovers. So that kind of shows that there are some coaches that do look at dime okay, we're getting into smaller personnel packages. We have to do something different than what we typically do, or else teams will just blow us up. And there are a lot of clips, Green Bay is the team I was watching most recently. So that's kind of what's freshest in my mind of them being in dime and the team gets into 12 personnel and they're running gap scheme, and it doesn't matter sometimes if you have everybody in the gap that they're supposed to be in, if the guy is only 195 pounds taking on a 330-pound pulling guard, so that kind of stuff comes up. So it's just interesting to see, now that I think that everybody has established that nickel is a defensive personnel that matches bodies the best on base downs, when is it proper to play dime and which teams are using dime in interesting ways? And that's kind of what I'm going to be diving into, and that should be out sometime soon.
Can you explain the NBA small ball thing for someone who only watches hockey like myself?
For sure. So, if you think about what your typical NBA lineup is, right? Point guard, it's sized bodies, right? So you got your point guard sized body. Everybody, you would think of a Steph Curry, a Damian Lillard. You got your shooting guard sized body, 1 through 5, right? What small ball is taking a guy who would typically be a power forward or a small forward, and you're putting him at a position where he's going to have to guard bigger guys. So the issue that you run into in basketball, and the reason why I think that there are misconceptions about small ball, is it actually matters whether or not a guy can physically stand up against, whoever it is that they're guarding. And that's kind of the way I was looking at it as well. My preconception when I started looking into the stuff is well, now that we know that, passing first is the way to approach defending these offenses in the NFL, why not play with better coverage bodies? And then looking at, okay, well, when you do that, what happens? How often do teams actually believe in doing that? And when they do that, what's happening with the offense? How does the offense respond? So kind of looking at that chess match between who gets to dictate what, as much as I would like to believe as a defensive guy that the defense can dictate some things to the offense, there is just a certain facet of it where you have to take from a physical perspective what the offense presents to you in order to match it up properly.
Do you think that there's like an issue with maybe like the psychology of a defensive coordinator? I haven't done it very often. You've done it a lot more than me in terms of like calling plays on defense, to being like, hey, like it's okay that we go and dime to allow 6-yard runs if we're going to like that's hard sometimes, I think, for a lot of people to wrap their heads around.
I mean, it's hard. I'm having a hard time answering it myself. It is difficult. And I think that really is not even so much about giving up the 5 or 6 yard runs as much as like the explosive ones. I think most defensive coordinators today are comfortable with saying like, hey, we're in dime to do something specific. I don't think that any defensive coordinator is working with the delusion that they can be in dime and play the run as well as they can in nickel or base, right? So if you give up maybe, 2 or 3 more yards per carry on average, if you're only playing dime a small percentage of the time, you can live with that. The issue is that, like, if you get into dime on 2nd and 6 and the offense is in 12 personnel, like I said, and they run outside zone at you and your dime backer, which is really a safety, or your 4th corner can't do anything for you in the run game, well, then it's not feasible to stay in that personnel package, right? Like if you have a better option. So then again, you're just kind of debating that trade-off between what makes the most sense in terms of denying certain things in coverage and making sure that you're not just allowing an offense to be extremely efficient and explosive in the run game, even, by them just playing their regular base stuff against you.
Can you, as we move towards a world where we're seeing these college, 3-4 defense, tight front defenses come to the NFL more and more, is there more of a role for dime when you're playing a tight front and you're saying, kind of like the 3 high safety stuff, right? And saying, okay, well, you know what, we are going to put more speed on the field because we just want to chase things down sideline to sideline. Like, do you think there's a future for that type of, rather than, okay, well, we're in a 4-down world, we're running everything we normally do, we just change bodies? Like, can there be a structural change that allows us to play more dime?
This is actually something that, in looking up this stuff for dime defense, that I think is going to lead to another article, and it's kind of tied to your question. I do think that we'll see more of what you're mentioning, like more of the tight fronts, maybe some more of the 3 high stuff outside of just like the Panthers, and some staffs who have borrowed more from the college level. I think what you'll really see is a division between like big nickel and speed nickel. So like playing with like a 3rd safety as like your sandbacker, and versus playing with the corner as your quote unquote sandbacker overhang type. That's really where I think you'll see the division in the way teams approach defense, from the personnel perspective, because it is difficult. I mean, number one, just from a rostering perspective, your 6 DB is just probably not going to be very good. Like, in as far as dividing like how much better that person is in coverage versus, your 2nd best linebacker or your 3rd best safety doing everything else plus the coverage stuff. So that's a mitigating factor for sure. But, outside of like the Rams, when you think about teams that play a traditional corner type in the slot, they're typically doing that to play more like man stuff. The Rams are like one of the only teams that will take a Jalen Ramsey or take their 3rd corner and be like, hey, you're going to play curl to flat and cover 4 the exact same way we would ask a 240-pound backer to play curl to flat. And that opens up a little bit more for them in terms of like their coverage package and how much defense they can run. So then, from that perspective, it's just like, okay, our 3rd corner versus our 3rd safety, and maybe let's treat our 3rd safety more like a backer, and we'll just continue to treat our 3rd corner like a corner, and then so that way, if the team has a problem matchup wise in the slot, we'll just play our speed nickel stuff and play tighter in coverage if that's what we've got to do. If you're playing a 12 personnel or 11 personnel in the slots, maybe not as big of an issue, and you're more worried about fitting the run. Well, then, hey, let's put a bigger body, not a backer, but a bigger body in that spot. And then we'll play a certain package of coverages and fronts and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's something that I never even thought about it like this, like going into even deeper, because the kind of how we talk about defense, especially that position that you're talking about, the overhang, the apex, the Sam nickel. It's like it really is Sam slash nickel. Mm-hmm. Whereas like, okay, maybe it's actually Sam slash, like you said, big nickel versus speed nickel. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting. Have you seen that? Like, is that something you've seen?
I haven't looked at enough data to say that I have anything solid, but in my head, as I think about how different teams in the NFL play nickel and how that position has evolved, I think it's pretty clear the teams that are like, we'll play with the strong safety instead of a corner because we're really just going nickel to play cover 3 anyways, versus the teams that maybe want to do some things differently in coverage or want to play more man, then it just behooves you to play with a true coverage body, right? And then that kind of ties into the conversation we were having about, do you want an inside leverage guy versus an outside leverage guy, and all of those kind of like small details that go into it. But yeah, if you're looking at a big picture, that's kind of where I think that the NFL level of defense, at least, is going to go. We'll see very specific types of nickel packages.
I guess this kind of goes back to the question from a couple of questions ago, but once you put a smaller player at nickel, whether it's a corner or whatever, how does that affect now, like specifically, like, so you don't have the Sam big body player who's inside leverage, who can fit the run up and whatever, and has eyes over there. Like how do you fit the run? How do you stop the run with those with a smaller type of player out there?
I think that's when you see more of just like the cover 1 stuff, because then at that point you're just playing like a body for a body, right? Like it's very intuitive. It's easy defensively. It ties in almost the exact same way as like cover 3 does. So that's probably the safest way, if you're not going to be like a Ravens type of team where you're playing like cover 0 on like 15% of your snaps, where you truly believe in pressure and playing tight man coverage as like a philosophical thing and not a special situation type of deal. That's really kind of what you're getting into. Otherwise, you start getting into like all the really complicated stuff that we've talked about that like Georgia and Alabama and Clemson do at the college level, where they're trying to kick certain guys out of run fits and playing, 3-over-2 on both sides and asking the linebacker to be this superhero run fitter and your 2 interior defensive linemen to be able to play a gap and a half. And you do see that at the NFL level, but I do think it's important. I think that when we talked to Brandon Staley, it was pretty clear that he believes it's important to be able to live in multiple worlds, right? Like when it comes to fitting the run and playing the pass. And, the better teams get out of passing and running in 11 personnel, the more important it's going to be to be able to live in both worlds. You can't just be a 1-gap defense like, the Seattle's used to be. And you can't really just be, a gap and a half type of defense like an Alabama can be at the college level because they got blue chips all over the place and you just can't beat them one-on-one no matter what you do. Like there has to be an ability to kind of toggle between both. So that's kind of, and that again is kind of plays into what I'm talking about in terms of making different decisions from a play calling and package perspective based on who that Sam / strong safety / corner, slot defender is. I do think that's going to be a really interesting thing to look at from a matchup perspective going forward.
Going back just to like straight dime stuff. You talked about a little bit about the Chiefs, and I know you wrote an article about Steve Spagnuolo like a few months ago. I don't really remember, but what is he doing specifically? And was it something like where he is like cool and like doing like regular stuff in like the regular season, and then he's coming with like super heavy cover 0 stuff? And I think that's so kind of what you said. Like now he's just saying, okay, we're gonna match bodies. Mm-hmm. So especially last year playing against Buffalo, good example. We're going to match bodies and we're going to blitz, and we're not going to give you a bad matchup. And I can tell you this because last night, team I was played man against me, and I just found the matchup. And like you have to remember, flag football man to man means there's no safety because it's right. Straight across. So just find the matchup and win. So like, is that what Spagnuolo is doing there in Kansas City?
I think that that's a piece of it. I mean, there are really 3 big things that are like a big kind of divergence from what he would do in nickel and base. The first one is cover zero, like you mentioned. And then because of cover zero and the threat of it, that's where he gets into the two other things that help force turnovers and pressure on the quarterback with sending only 4 or 3. And that's getting to like playing with brackets. So you feign pressure, right? Everybody looks like it's cover one or you're playing tight in coverage. And then all of a sudden you got 2 double teams in the slot, and now all of a sudden, your hot throw is gone. Now you've got to try to work these difficult throws at intermediate range that are out on the sideline, right? Those are just difficult throws to complete. And then the last thing through the threat of pressure is you get these crazy kind of rotations to cover 2. Like I know that everybody kind of points it out who's watched the Chiefs. There was a game maybe 2 or 3 years ago in Mexico City where they were playing the Chargers. You got that Tyrann Mathieu near pick 6 where it looks like he's going to be one of the deep half players in cover 2. And all of a sudden he rotates down. The safety that was to the strong side rotates all the way over to the weak half. And the guy that was playing the nickel drops all the way back to the half on the strong side. Like you get these like really funky, crazy rotations. I think I tweeted it out right after I put out the article. And since this has come up, I think when the dime thing comes up, I'll probably tag it to it again so people kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about here. But that's what's really interesting, And then you think about the Tennessees. They're also another team that uses the threat of like cover 1 when we're sending 5 to get into these kind of crazy rotations where maybe you're running like your creepers or your simulated pressures and playing cover 2 behind it, right? Like, and that gets really interesting as well, right? Because it's 2 very different approaches in terms of attacking those types of coverages as a quarterback. If you think that you're getting tight man-to-man coverage or you're getting pressure, your thought process is a lot different than it's a soft zone. There's a guy who's just relating to a receiver, but his eyes are on me. So what throws are available? Can I throw a corner route? I thought I only had time to throw the slant. Now I've got to work all the way back up to the top of the progression. And those types of things upset rhythms. And that's how you get your coverage sacks, quote unquote, right? Is just by making the guy pat the ball. So those are the 2 teams I think that probably do that the best, that I see that the most of. That's kind of different from what they would do in a nickel or a base type of personnel scenario.
You talking through the quarterback's decision making is literally how fast I do it when I'm on the field. So you can understand why I throw as many interceptions as I do. All right, so let's move over to Mr. Tony Treash. You had some ideas that popped into your head recently about kind of revolving around the coverage versus pass rush debate, just kind of what we're already talking about. So you went and looked up, a lot of the stuff, especially here at PFF, has been spent on the NFL side when it comes to the coverage versus pass rush debate. So what have you found on a college football side in your, I guess, so far limited research?
Yeah, I mean, it was just, so like last week we put out some, brought up rankings of college football, our top 10 offenses, top 10 defenses, and I thought 2 top 10 pass rush units. And, the 2 teams that really kind of were at the head of this thought were Ohio State and Oklahoma, because they have 2 excellent pass rush units, best in college football. But the coverage units, I think those are probably the 2 question marks around those teams outside of the quarterback situation with Ohio State. And I think I was watching Diners, Drivers, and Dives, and I saw Guy Pay's bleach blonde tips, and I got lost in them. And then all of a sudden it just popped in my head. And I went back and I was looking at our guys, Eric Eager and George Chahuri's research on the NFL about it. And then all of a sudden the whole running backs don't matter popped in my head again. And I was like, wait a minute. Is this a situation where this may not be 100% true at the collegiate level? So for those who don't know, running backs actually are important in college football. I mean, because you have the talent disparity in some situations is so massive that these guys can actually generate a lot of value. Like, Travis Etienne, for example, that was a valuable piece, one of the more valuable non-quarterbacks you've ever seen in college football in the PFF college era. And so I went back and I looked at it and I split up, before I did it, I was like, I want to split up Power 5 and Group of 5. And what I found was, at least in the preliminary findings, the disparity between, coverage and pass rush at the Group of 5 level looked exactly like the NFL. But the Power 5 level, the disparity was much, much slimmer. And, now you have all these thoughts, kind of coming into your head. And they, George and Eric, they talked about it on their podcast as well, the forecast. And, you look at some of these bigger programs, and even too, the correlation between, and I thought this might be a problem as well, the correlation between, our coverage grade and pass rush grade, it still was, pretty wide like the NFL. So that didn't really explain it too much. But also too, I want to, look more into the recruiting factor of it, look at some of these guys, the athletic profiles, because I think that has a lot to do with it at the Power 5 level. So, hopefully dig more into it over the next couple of weeks and get something out there. But it's definitely an interesting thought that I'm excited to dig deeper into.
So something that I was thinking about with the coverage versus pass rush debate is, and this is really just on the NFL side, and I haven't really given it too much thought on the college side, but on the NFL side, I do wonder how much our ideas about this change, because like when you think about it, we don't have data going back to 1970 or whatever, right? We have data going back, the NFL side to 2006, and even that, we have even deeper processes, data collection processes that aren't even that old. Especially when it comes to coverage. So I'm very curious to see how our ideas and our thoughts about this coverage versus pass rush debate continue to grow as the NFL leaves the Seahawks world. So like, right now we the NFL for the past 10 years or whatever has lived in a cover 3, cover 1. We're going to show you cover 3, we're going to show you cover 1, and we're going to play it like that. And now I think we're all in agreement here that the NFL is, it was inevitable, but it's happening now where the NFL is going to shift away. And I think we already saw last year, most, amount of like quarters coverage, cover 6 coverages that we've seen charted since we began charting these things. So I'm interested to see kind of how our ideas change, because it reminded me of something that you said, Diante, I don't know, like a month ago or something like that. I'm going to butcher the quote, but basically when you play in a one high defense, then in a sense, the coverage players, you need great technique out of those guys because they don't have as much help. And then when you reverse it, it's like now you're playing a 2 high world. So you need these very technical, very good, bodies up front to deal with the fact that they are less people there.
Yeah, that's basically it. I think that the wording I use is like some things have scheme answers and some things require like athletic and technical answers. So to your point, if you're playing more like cover 3, then you do need certain athletic and technical answers in coverage, right? There's only one safety deep. There's a lot of space to throw to vertically. So that requires guys being very sound in terms of their technique and being able to use their athleticism to bail them out when technique isn't enough, right? And then you think about, when we started talking about like the tight fronts that Dave Aranda and Justin Wilcox and a lot of these guys from the 3-4 world at the college level have used, that requires different types of technical and athletic answers up front, and you just have to find what matches. Like for as cool as I think that a lot of the newer kind of 2 high stuff is, it would be silly. It would have been silly of Ohio State having Chase Young and the Bosas, to say like, hey, for as great a pass rushers as you guys are, you're going to go play in a 4-eye for 80% of the snaps. Not saying that they couldn't be successful. They probably would have still been award-winning, game-changing guys being asked to do that. But is that a maximization of who they are? Probably not, right? So those are the kinds of things that I think that we always have to be mindful of, as we continue to analyze that coverage versus pass rush thing in that debate, and how we look at, what these different kind of mitigating factors are, what the certain tells are in terms of what the data is giving us. And like you said, the scheme and the body types and all that stuff is tied to it as well. Because this debate would look a lot different in the mid 80s, right? When it's Lawrence Taylor, when it's Derek Thomas as a pass rushers, and they're clearly just better athletes than the guys that they're being matched up against, that does change the conversation. When tackles are a lot better now than they were 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, then it does get too. Exactly. It gives us a different context, For as good as a guy like Aaron Donald is, if he's an edge guy instead of being able to win on the inside, maybe his career pans out differently, because we look at him as like the anomaly of all anomalies, right? And rightfully so. But if guards were as good at pass protection as tackles were, maybe it's not the same kind of conversation. Maybe you wouldn't even have these different types of anomalies that people who exist more on the pass rush side of the argument will kind of bank on to say that it's still something that's like a clear bedrock in terms of stopping the pass.
I'll go back. I want to go back to the Ohio State thing because I do think it's interesting. we kind of knocked them all three of us this whole season on the back end and just their defense.
Rightfully so, I would say. Rightfully so.
But my only pushback, it is rightfully so. My only pushback is like you go into it's hard to change plans midway through a season. And I think they really thought, well, first of all, they went to the national championship game. So like they did some stuff right on defense. Though that might be maybe more of a thing of the conference they played in. But it's hard to change plans halfway through a season, even like halfway through a training camp, hard to change plans in the direction you're going once you got the trainers on the track. So like for them, maybe not realizing that the two outside corners who need to be great in a system like they're playing, were not up to snuff last year. When Tresh, when you just sticking with Ohio State, do you think we're going to see better play? Like, let's say they keep running the same stuff. They're staying, cover 1, cover 3 like that. Do you think the secondary is that much better this year?
It's interesting because, I thought last year Ohio State was going to have one of the better secondaries in college football. Yep. Because I think a lot of people thought that, because you look at someone like Sevyn Banks, in that limited sample that we saw from him in 2019, he looked the part. I mean, he was one of my conviction breakouts. I was ready for him. He's going to be the next first round cornerback from Ohio State. And I thought Shaun Wade had an opportunity to be that as well, even though he's kind of pigeonholed to the slot, moving out to the outside. He had the physical tools to be that guy. And then it was, for some reason in 2020, it kind of washed away with Sevyn Banks. And then Shaun Wade, he, like Diante was saying, from a technique perspective, it just really was not there. And that was just, you saw it from both of them. And I think we are going to see an improvement out of Sevyn Banks. But I still think and it's interesting because if you stack up going back to 2014 and the entire PFF college era, that was by far the worst performing Ohio State secondary by a country mile. It was not even remotely close. So I think we're going to see, a little improvement, but are we going to see that, that 2014 through 2019 coverage play? I don't think so. But at the end of the day, it's that pass rush unit. And that's what I'm hoping we can kind of get some more answers on, how much can they ride with that? And I think we're going to kind of realize, hopefully in the coming weeks that, they can get by with that. We've always said that. I remember, Seth, we've been talking months ago about this, is that, they can, teams like Oklahoma and Ohio State, they could probably get by with, an average coverage unit because of that pass rush is so strong. And two, they have such a good offense, and offense kind of matters more. But, hopefully we can get more clarity that, if they're just even a little bit better than coverage, I think that defense is going to be in better shape overall than we thought from, the start.
So I just want to stick with one more question to you, Tresh, about Ohio State, but what about the passers that they're playing against this year? Like, do you think there's more than just Indiana who can give them problems on their schedule?
No, not at all. And I was
right, there you go.
I was talking with some people. I forget who was on a radio hit, and it's like, there's not a quarterback that we can completely hang our hat on in the Big Ten. Like even Michael Penix Jr., he has his question marks because he's the durability issues are there. Graham Mertz, I think if he plays like he did against Illinois, then yeah, but how much
they don't get them.
injury?
I mean, they might see him in the title game, but they don't even get them. Yeah.
In the title game, that's best case scenario. And then you look at their other best team they're playing on the schedule, Oregon, and their quarterback situation's shaky. Yeah, Anthony Brown, if he's the guy, then no, that's not going to be any problem at all whatsoever. And it helps them too because they have a bye before they play Indiana. So I mean, I think they're in good shape no matter what. But I still think it's CJ Stroud's going to be the biggest deciding factor whether or not this team's going to be really fighting for a national championship, or they just kind of a one and done appear in the CFP, then they're out. But again, it goes back to that conversation we've always been having. I think there's just so much more uncertainty with this upcoming season because there's not a lot of, clear cut established quarterbacks across the board. And I think that's going to make for an interesting CFP.
Well, you know what? Seth, the question you asked actually was kind of triggering something I was just kind of pondering in my head when Tresh was talking, which is, even the best like blue chip programs like the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, I think they pretty clearly believe that coverage is more important than pass rush. If you look at like the ways that they invest from a recruiting perspective, the kinds of ways that they play in terms of like the fronts and the coverages, and to your point about like quarterback play and their quality of quarterback play that they see in conference and what they expect to see when they make the college football playoff, they clearly believe that, like, hey, the idea of us just putting our 4 best pass rushers on the field and then just playing, cover 3 or cover 1 across the board, that's not going to cut it. So I think, to that point, and I'm sure that they have data that supports that as well. And these are coaches that have lived in worlds prior where they were like, we're going to play cover 1. We're going to blitz all the time. We're going to play a lot of cover 3, And that, to me, I think is what's really interesting, is that as quarterback play kind of spreads, and the level of proficiency of quarterback play at the Power 5 level continues to grow, I think that we will see more data to support the fact that investments in coverage probably returns better long-term investments than investments in pass rush.
In these uncertain times, life is full of questions like, when should I start thinking about life insurance? But however difficult these questions may be, Western and Southern can help you answer them. Backed by over 130 years of experience, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind. Western and Southern Financial Group, life insurance, retirement, and investments. Compensated endorser, products issued by member companies of Western and Southern Financial Group, Cincinnati, Ohio. Did you guys know right now on PFF.com, because fantasy football season is here, you can get 40% off with promo code SAVE40 off any PFF subscription to all first-time subscribers. So that's SAVE40, one word. You get access to PFF's fantasy football draft guide, complete with our player rankings and projections. You get the college football preview magazine written by me and Anthony Treash. You get the first edition of the 2022 NFL draft guide. That's Mike Renner's baby, and all of PFF's locked overall article content. Again, that's promo code SAVE40 for 40% off any PFF subscription. And then with that, you can get access to PFF's fantasy tools for $5.99. So that's a good segue, because you talk about how quarterback play is becoming just better and better. And it's something that I've talked about a lot on this podcast, and anyone who wants to listen to me speak, I've talked about. And that leads me to what I'm focusing on, what I'm writing about, which is like the kind of the new, what I'll call like the new college option offense. So I think it's kind of a pushback. The reason I'm writing about this is kind of pushback because we saw with Tennessee this year, when there's like a kind of like a mid-level to low-level Power 5 team, what happens is you get the people online, and I've said this stuff all the time. It's like, well, what should they be doing? Like, how can you, like, you're never going to out-recruit anybody. You're never going to, out-resource anybody. So how can you do it so that you can play a brand of football that allows you to elevate kind of like the some of the weak points or whatever? And everyone says we should run the option, right? So we saw it with Georgia Tech. And they're off of it now. But I think the Tennessee thing was interesting because I think a lot of people said, Kansas too. What should Kansas do? They run the option. And I'm on board with that. Like, I would love to see more option football in the Power 5. I think it would be great. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, wait a minute. Quarterback play is too good now. Quarterback play is way too good for you to just say, okay, we're gonna put a running back at quarterback, basically. And I mentioned this last week when I had Dustin Crum on interviewing him, when I talk about going to the Army coaching clinic and we watched them practice. And like, I've been a quarterback coach for a long time. I've never seen a practice where every quarterback did running back drills for 45 minutes. Like, so that's what you're doing to your quarterback, right? It's a running back who can kind of throw the football a little bit. But with quarterbacks being so talented now because they're just getting so much more reps than they ever had at such a young age and just throwing balls, and reps are good, right? So instead of being like, hey, maybe we should run an option offense for these like Kansases, for these Tennessees, I look at Tennessee and I see them bring in Josh Heupel and running this, what we've kind of termed as the super spreader offense. Like, that, I think, is the new way to kind of deal with a talent disparity at these levels. So when I say super spreader offense, I mean literally as wide as you can possibly go, putting your receivers sideline to sideline, creating as much space as you can between them. But the interesting thing is, it's really you're creating space for the run game. It's interesting. So you're spreading your receivers out as much as possible. But for the most part, I think you're playing with a tight end who is more of a 6 offensive lineman. And North Carolina is a good example of that, where that he's like, they're playing with 11 personnel, but he's never going out for a pass. He's rarely going out for a pass. And if he does, it's a little slice route or something like that. He's not really getting the ball. So you're creating this heavy box in 11 personnel where you can be diverse in the run game in a way that when we were in the quote unquote spread era, the 4 wide spread era, you just did not have that versatility. You can get some stuff by having your quarterback be a runner, but you still didn't have any blocking scheme diversity, where now you're putting another big body in there off the line of scrimmage. Now you're running GF counter, you're running GT counter, you're running split zone and all that stuff. So you can just do so much more from a perspective in the run game. And the passing game, what you've done is you've put your receivers on islands, and all you're saying is run vertical. If you can get over top of the corner as you're running vertical at like 8 yards or 10 yards, whatever the rule is, then keep running vertical, and we will throw you the ball vertically, and that's it. And there's, I've looked, the data will be in the article, but like, there's not a very high percentage of an interception when you throw the ball vertically down the field, because all you're doing is playing one-on-one with the corner. The safety is not involved. And they will check out of plays where if it's like a really split 2 high quarters look, they're not throwing the ball down the field. They're going to try and run the football. And so you're not creating difficulties on your quarterback in terms of, okay, well, we might throw an interception. Like, this isn't LSU's offense of 2019. This isn't Jimbo Fisher's offense that we've seen it at Texas A&M, like where they're throwing over the middle of the field and involving more of the defensive players. When you just throw down the sideline, you're involving one defensive player per throw. So like that type of thing. And then, so again, the option part of it is, if I can get over top of the cornerback, I do it. We throw a touchdown, no problem. Or we throw it out of bounds. And if not, I just hook it like 8 yards. And we don't even care. That's the thing that I keep going back to. When I see these teams option it, and then the receiver, the DB's playing too far off, and he hooks. A normal hook, you're running your steps, blah, blah, blah. You break down, you turn around, the ball's there. These guys are coming so far back down their stem because they're saying, what we don't want is a cornerback to be able to stop and then drive on the ball because you're just sitting there on the sideline. We're going to come all the way back down the stem. And I've seen teams give up 5 yards of basically of a completion, going from like, sometimes it's even like more. I mean, sometimes they're catching the ball at the line of scrimmage after running all the way 8 yards because they're telling the quarterback, hey, you put the ball back down the stem and to the sideline. Because again, we don't want to throw anywhere over the middle of the field. We don't want to put ourselves in danger. And we don't care if we're turning a 10-yard gain into a 5-yard gain, because guess what's happening next play? We're going to do it again. And we're going to throw, and if we can throw a completion for 40 yards and a touchdown, and you saw this with UCF all the time, we're just going to do it. And then you're fucked because we just created so much more explosive plays without any trouble of throwing the ball anywhere else on the field. So I think, like, yes, I would love to see more option football because I think it's great. Like, I'm talking like triple option football because it's super fun to watch. But quarterback play is just way, way, way too good to not have these kids throw the ball like all the time. Like, and one of the best examples I have is Drew Lock. Drew Lock probably isn't a second-round pick in the NFL draft if he doesn't play with Josh Heupel at Missouri in 2016 and 17, I believe. So, yeah, like, I think that because his feet aren't good, you know what I mean? Like, he doesn't really read the middle of the field very well. He doesn't throw the ball super accurately, but he scored, he threw 50 touchdowns in like 2017 or whatever. And then not as much under Derek Dooley, and where NFL, he had come from back, he was in college, but he'd come back to the NFL in Missouri when he was the OC in 2018, I believe. And then you see Drew Lock 2 years in the NFL, with NFL coaching, and it hasn't been good. Bryce Petty is a great example. Look the part, throwing for all these yards as a Baylor Bear, and then he's basically the worst NFL quarterback of all time in the past 5 years. So it's you're taking this stuff away. Yeah, so that's just kind of where I'm thinking about it. And we have some really interesting data. And UCF, I talk about hypo all the time, but UCF was the past 2 seasons of 2019 and 2020, their average formational width, yards between receivers, is 30. Last year was 39 yards. That means receiver to receiver, they take up 75%, 3/4 of the field. And they're just trying to say, hey, we're going to create these one-on-ones on the outside while trying to make you guess and have this decision-making process, because we're still big inside, which is something we didn't have in the spread era, which is we're light inside. They're big inside. They can run as much stuff as they can. And again, talking to Dustin Crum last week, Kent State runs this type of offense very similar to what Josh Heupel is doing at UCF and what the old Baylor guys used to do. And they have a super diverse run game. They have them do all sorts of different type of run schemes because they have the personnel in the box to do that. And they're creating these one-on-ones outside because a lot of teams are so afraid of they're going to max fit in quarters. They're going to play the 2 safety. It's going to look like too high, but really those 2 safeties are flat-footed, 8 yards, 10 yards, and coming down, and you can hit you're going to get a one-on-one, even if it's technically quarters coverage. So yeah, I think that's where college football is headed. If you have the players like Alabama, like LSU, like Oklahoma, it goes back to what we were saying, kind of Clemson is kind of in between, I think, both of them. Me and Diante have talked about is if you have those players, then protect and run crossing routes. Just run people away. You can run whatever you want over the middle of the field. Doesn't matter. Your quarterback's good enough. But if you might not have that stuff, then I think this type of offense is for you, because it's option football, which we all love, but you're using the skill and the continued evolution of the quarterback position. And that's my spiel. Thoughts, questions? Good.
No, I mean, I think that, you and I have talked about that before. I mean, the best way I can kind of distill my thoughts on it is that it is an extension of option offense. It's just that, the option offense that our parents and grandparents grew up on was trying to manufacture a constraint of space, right? You bring all the bodies in tight, so that way you can find space that, kind of eliminates the differences in athleticism. Now, what I think we're seeing, especially at the group of 5 level, is we're manufacturing a maximization of space, and and again, it's not for the purposes of using all the space. That's not what the idea is.
It's 2 different spaces in a sense.
Exactly.
2 completely different things. Yeah.
Exactly. You're not using all 53 and a third yards from sideline to sideline. The idea is to make the defense stretch 53 and a third yards wide, so that way you get access to the space on the field that you want. And that helps a quarterback that's not going to be able to beat pressure with his feet, that's not going to be able to beat coverage with his eyes, that's not going to be able to beat tight window throws with his arm. The entire idea is making things as easy as possible. That's really what it's about. It goes back, I always make basketball comparisons, but when you think about basketball teams that always are throwing up threes, to me, it's not even really a statement being made on how good a 3-point shooter is or is not. It's just, what's the easiest shot to get off? It's the one you take directly after you catch the basketball. And every second you hold the basketball after that, defense gets better and better and better, against you. It's the same idea as a quarterback. What is the hardest throw to make? It's late in the progression. It's later in the progression. When pressure is tighter, when coverage is tighter, everybody is distributed in routes. That's when throws are hardest to make. The quarterbacks that perform best, especially at the college level and even at the pro level, are the ones that get the ball out of their hands quickly. It's really that simple. The faster if you get the ball out your hands faster, chances are that means that you're seeing the matchup you want, or you're seeing the kind of space that you need in order to fit the ball into where you're trying to send it. That's really all that it's about. And that's one thing that college coaches, especially on the offensive side, deserve a lot of credit for, because this is a very kind of fast turnaround over the last half decade, maybe 8 years, swinging away from trying to be extra precise in the passing game to understanding that there are better ways to manipulate space than trying to create these extremely precise progressions where you're attacking every level of the field. It's just more to add. All you're really doing is giving the quarterback more homework, right? You want your guy to be able to perform with the least amount of pre-snap work possible. If a quarterback can just look and see safety shell, presser off, numbers in the box. If you're able to make a decision off of just those three things and don't have to think about anything else, chances are you'll be more successful than not. And even if you're unsuccessful, it's likely not going to be because, you made the wrong decision as much as the defense just happened to outperform you on that one particular play.
Yeah, and more than just one particular play, when you see these teams, Kent State played against Arizona State and Wisconsin, and if like those two teams, Power 5, different talent disparity, play cover one, you're good. Like that's it. Like if you just play cover one, like these offenses can have some problems. But another reason why the thing is it's important to talk about this is because of some of the top quarterbacks that are coming out and that are going to be in the 2022 draft that we're looking at and saying, well, what are you outside of this offense? There's so many. I mean, Liberty runs it. North Carolina had gone away from it, but in 2019, in Sam Howell's freshman year, you see Dylan Gabriel, UCF. He's going to have obviously a different offense and a vastly different offense, and with Gus Malzahn at UCF, but he was in there. And there's a few of the guys that Dustin Crum, for example, is like, what are you outside of this offense? And one of the things is like, you look at this quarterback position in this offense, like you kind of said it, like you just don't have to be super technical. When you look at, I always go back to Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is like one of the most technically gifted quarterbacks, certainly with his feet, that's kind of come out. And Justin Fields is the same way. Trevor Lawrence is A+. Trey Lance is very good. Whereas this next group that's coming out, and you can even add Spencer Rattler into this, even though it's a very different offense, it's like we're still creating offense even without technical ability from the quarterback. And I think that's super interesting to come, because some of them are going to turn into very good players at the NFL level. And some of them are going to be Drew Lock, who just never fixes the feet, who only just vibes in the pocket and just can't get the ball off. So yeah, I'm super interested to see how this plays out next season, and then going forward as this offense spreads or super spreads throughout the nation. All right, before we get out of here, let's run down the list of the PFF top 10 returning outside cornerback duos in the country, starting with, of course, DBU, LSU, Derek Stingley Jr. and Eli Ricks. Josh?
Yeah, I mean, you can almost pause the list after number one because no one's sniffing these two. I mean, as long as these two stay fully healthy. I mean, when we handed out this, we were making the defensive rankings. That was like the toughest defense to rank was LSU, because I almost want to throw out everything that we saw last year, because it's going to be a different system. Hopefully Derek Stingley Jr. can stay healthy, but these two, when healthy, are the best man coverage corners in the Power 5. I think Ahmad Sauce Gardner from Cincinnati, I think he makes a reasonable debate with Eli Ricks there for number 2, but Derek Stingley Jr. is number 1. I mean, he's a rare athlete. This is going to be historically, I think, when we have this database at PFF College expanded many years down the road, I still think this duo right here will be one of the ones that stand out overall as one of the best that we will ever see.
Diante, your thoughts on Derek Stingley Jr.? I know you want to talk about him.
I mean, what is there to say that hasn't been said, 100 times over? Really, and this is kind of an off-the-cuff question to ask. If nothing comes to mind, I don't blame you, but I'm trying to think of another point of reference that we have recently to this kind of tandem of man coverage ability, because it might be the only other thing I may be able to think of is another LSU pair between Claiborne and Peterson.
Yeah. And
that was like a one-year thing, and Claiborne was still very young. And obviously it's helped by having Tyrann Mathieu between the two of them. But, when I think about, it's very rare, that you come across two elite man coverage corners. Even, with Alabama, was Minkah Fitzpatrick able to play outside with Averett. Like he could have, yes, but that's just not the way that he was being used. It's pretty rare that you see something like this. You know, you typically may come across, especially at the college level, maybe two elite safeties playing with one another. You know, if you're talking about the blue chip, highest level of programs, but to have two true man coverage corners that are around the same age, same ability level, that are both able to kind of handle, you know, a one-on-one matchup against the number one receiver, that's rare. You know, that's rare for your number two corner to be as close to like a surefire, you know, top 15, top 12 pick at cornerback level of talent with Derek Stingley.
I think with LSU is, I think we talked about this, you and I, Tresh, is like LSU was so bad the past couple of years, I believe, like in defending the slot. And that's where teams killed them the past couple of years. And it's just like, is that going to happen for a third year in a row? Probably not. Like this is just going to regress. And if that doesn't happen, we know they're going to be great on the outside and they should be able to kind of get back to what we think LSU defense should be. All right, number 2, Texas Christian University, Trevius Hodges-Tomlinson and Noah Daniels on the outside.
Yeah, Treavius Hodges-Tomlinson, the nephew of LaDainian Tomlinson. He has mirror ability that's unmatched, really. I mean, he's always on the hip of his receiver. Forced tight coverage at the highest rate we saw from a Power 5 corner this past season. And, you know, he is on the smaller end as far as projecting to the next level. I mean, I think that could be an issue. He might get thrown into the slot. But as far as college covering ability, it's an elite level. And that's why he was one of the highest graded cornerbacks that we saw this past season. And with Noah Daniels, I mean, this guy he's got legitimate track speed. And I was really kind of bummed when he had that season-ending injury because he was on the path of having a really big breakout campaign. Hopefully he can get back to that this upcoming season. But when you force 7 incompletions and allow only 6 catches in 4 games, that's pretty damn impressive. So I'm excited to see what this duo does in 2021.
So last year we talked about how TCU had this great safety tandem, right? And both playing in the NFL. This year, great outside cornerback tandem. D, you know a little bit about the TCU defense. Like, what would you say they would like to see more of? Like, what is Gary Patterson thinking? Like, oh, this is my team because I have. Like, if he was building a team, what do you think he would want?
I think he would probably lean closer to what he had last year than what I'll have this year. I mean, obviously, you'll never deny taking 2 great corners, right? That's not going to hurt your defense. It'll never hurt your defense. But in terms of like the breadth and width of all the stuff that he can run defensively, you'd probably rather have 2 safeties that are capable of doing everything, right? Whether it's rolling down into the box or playing man on a slot, you know, playing out in the deep half, you know, spinning down the single high. Like, they do a lot of everything. And the way that they do it is pretty unique. So I do think for that reason, if you just gave him, you know, 11, you know, the little magnet things to put on the whiteboard and said, hey, I want you to rank, you know, which position is most important to you, that free safety and weak safety position for him would probably be at the top. And then corners would be right behind.
Okay, number 3, Auburn, Roger McCreary and Nehemiah Pritchett / Deshaun Miller.
Yeah, and one thing too with TCU, I mean, they're bringing in TJ Carter, the Memphis transfer, going from corner to safety, and I think he's going to be a pretty good player for him. But with Auburn, I mean, I was kind of bummed for West Virginia because they kind of got screwed. I mean, they had Tyke Smith and Treash Miller, and they both, you know, bailed ship for SEC programs, and rightfully so. I think, you know, regardless if it's Treash Miller and Nehemiah Pritchett might end up playing the slot, but I think they're going to end up doing, you know, subbing in and out. I mean, whoever's on the field, it's going to be a fantastic duo on the field. I mean, you look at Roger McCreary, he didn't make our top 10 returning cornerbacks only because this is one of the most talented returning cornerback groups that we've had in a long time. He's right there, probably number 11. I mean, he's fast, fluid, great feet, press man off zone. He's making plays. And you look at these other guys, they had exceptional numbers. Treash Miller at West Virginia. You know, I think, you know, this Auburn defense is getting me a little excited, but that offense still isn't. I mean, you have Bo Nix at quarterback, and the receiving unit, like it says in the PFF College Preview magazine. I mean, you have more just as many targets as most of their receiving unit that's going to be on the field this season. So I think that's a major concern. But I like what they have at the cornerback. Smoke Monday, off-ball linebackers are there. I mean, there's a lot to be excited about with this defense, but it's just not going to work with the offense they have. And it goes back to offense does still at the end of the day matter. But c'est la vie.
Cincinnati, your boy, Ahmad Gardner and Kobe Bryant. Anyways, talk about them and I'll go in a little spiel here. Cincinnati, Gardner and Bryant. Just for me, I'm just interested to see how much man coverage they do continue playing without Marcus Freeman running the defense. New defensive coordinator, everything works so great because they were able to just annoy people, confuse them and annoy people with that defense and then just play man coverage in the back end. We will see what it's like under a new defensive coordinator, and it's an Ohio State guy, and I forgot who it is. There you go.
Yeah, I think all indications are like they're going to, if it's not broke, don't fix it type of scenario, but I think they're going to mix it up a little bit. And that's why when we were talking about the games that we're really looking forward to watching, that Notre Dame game against Cincinnati, that's going to be a very interesting one to keep an eye on. Just with, Marcus going up to Notre Dame, I think it's going to be an interesting one to watch. But yeah, Sauce Gardner, this guy, I go back to his true freshman season. It was one of the best cornerback seasons I remember seeing over the last few years. There were a couple jumped hitches that, made me jump out of my seat, turning for pick sixes. Kobe Bryant, I think he was the one I was kind of questioning. I think the verdict's still out on him, or, it's just kind of boom or bust with what he can do on the field. There's some high-end moments. Sure. He has a lot of plays on the ball, but he also has a lot of big plays, given up. So I think that's a little bit of a question mark, even though they are here at number 4. I wouldn't put him in, truly elite category with Sauce, but I think Sauce is that good that he kind of carries his duo here to number
4. North Carolina, number 5, Storm Duck and Tony Grimes.
Yeah, Storm Duck. He's had injury history this past season. Only played a couple games because of it. But you go back to his true freshman season back in 2019. He's been one of the top 20 highest graded Power 5 corners. One of the best true freshman seasons that we've seen in the PFF college era. And with Tony Grimes, he's one of my biggest breakout candidates for this upcoming season. This was one of Mac Brown's biggest recruiting gets early on in his career. 5-star recruit. We did get to see him a little bit down the stretch of last year. And he was great. Only allowed 8 catches on 20 targets. Around a half a yard per coverage snap. Very few explosive receptions allowed. I think only 1. And the biggest thing too is that he was supposed to be a senior in high school last year, but he reclassified early, came in. And so I think he's going to take that next step forward this fall. And hopefully Storm Duck can stay healthy, because if so, that's really going to carry this North Carolina defense too. And I think there's a lot of interesting pieces with this North Carolina team, not only within the offensive side of the ball, of course, losing Diante Brown, Daz Newsome in the running backs, but you have, Grimes and Duck at outside corner, but then you have a defensive line that I think has a wide range of outcomes, because they are welcoming in so many young, talented recruits, but none of them are really well polished there yet. But the potential is there, and it's just all about when are we going to see that potential fully tapped into. So I think that those are 2 big storylines, and that's North Carolina does have a chance to be a dangerous team. It's just whether or not they can kind of get there this year. I'm not so sure they can, but the future is bright for the program.
Yeah, I think 2020 was really the year that they needed to make a push. All right, number 6, Indiana, Tywone Mullen and Reese Taylor / Jalen Williams.
So this group, we have 3 here because Tywone Mullen, he was put in the slot a little bit. Reese Taylor, Jalen Williams, they get put on the outside, but also too, they would also sub out. But Tywone Mullen, even though he does have inside-outside versatility, even when he's on the outside, he was a truly lockdown guy. He's top 5 among Power 5 corners over the last couple of years in both yards per coverage snap allowed and forced incompletion rate. I think this guy is, he's going to be an NFL corner. His brother's an NFL corner. He has NFL bloodlines all across the way through. And you have Reese Taylor and Jalen Williams, who they're very good. Their zone awareness, their zone eyes are just exceptional. And so I think, Indiana's going to have a good defense again with this trio really leading the pack there.
Number 7, the Washington Huskies, Trent McDuffie and Kyler Gordon.
Yeah, Trent McDuffie, we only got a small sample from him this past season because of their COVID impacted season, but he maintained what he could do, what we saw back in 2019. one of the best tackling cornerbacks too. Kyler Gordon's the more interesting one of this duo, even though, I mean, Trent McDuffie's great. I mean, we all know that, but Kyler Gordon, he hasn't really fully maximized his potential. But I mean, this guy's truly, I mean, a freak athlete. I mean, he is the definition. He is one of the college football freaks. He was on Bruce Feldman's freak list. I mean, 42.5-inch vertical, 6.5 second three cone, pro agility time of sub 3.9. Only started a handful of games on his career on the outside for Washington. He's performed well, but not at that really level that I think a lot of people are expecting him to. So that's something I'm really keeping an eye
on. Number 8, Pitt Panthers, Marquise Williams, Damari Mathis.
Yeah, this too is just perfect fits for Narduzzi's press quarter system. Yeah. I mean, they've been great. I'm excited to see what this duo can do, just because Damari Mathis didn't play last year. Marquise Williams was kind of thrusted into starting action right away, but he had high level production for a first year starter. Allowed 35 yards or less in all but one game. Good forced incompletion rate. Just pretty much, it almost looks spitting image of what Damari Mathis did back in 2019.
Number 9, the Clemson Tigers, Andrew Booth Jr., and then Sheridan Jones, Mario Goodrich.
Yeah, this one is, I think, probably one of the more boom or bust ones on the list. I wouldn't be surprised if they played their way into the, maybe top 3 among this entire group. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if they slipped out of the top 10. Andrew Booth Jr., has like highlight reel plays for days. You search his name on Twitter, you're going to find these ridiculous one-handed interceptions, whether it's in an actual game, practice, or spring game. I think he could, really challenge Storm Duck to be the best cornerback in the conference this year. But we'll see. He did kind of progress as the season went on back in 2020. The other starting spot's a little bit more of a question mark. I thought Mario Goodrich was going to be a breakout candidate last year.
Me too.
But yeah, he just didn't really kind of do that. Sheridan Jones, he just came in spurts there. So one of those two, I think one of them will emerge, but we'll see which one it is.
And last but not least, number 10, Northwestern, AJ Hampton and Cameron Mitchell.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of absurd because you lose a first-round cornerback and you're a Northwestern, but they still have a top 10 duo, just because we did see a little bit what Cameron Mitchell could do, and he performed great. AJ Hampton, it's funny because he slipped up in the 2 biggest and most important games of the year down the stretch, but Cameron Mitchell really stepped up in those 2 outings, and he performed great, especially when Greg Newsome went down. I mean, he only had 5 catches allowed for 46 yards on 14 targets, and made 4 plays on the ball on the others. So, I think he's going to be a breakout player for the Wildcats. AJ Hampton, I think he's going to clean it up. He has a trace to do that. But as far as like the rest of the Northwestern team goes, I don't think they're not getting back to the Big Ten championship anytime soon.
So Northwestern's defensive coordinator, Mike Hankwitz, just retired. He was there for 12 seasons, so basically almost the entire Pat Fitzgerald run. One of the most underrated guys. They always have, not always, okay, they're Northwestern, but every few years they have a great defense, and he's been the architect of those squads until this year because he's just retired. All right, that'll do it for the PFF College Football Podcast. I'm Seth Galina with Diante Lee and Anthony Treash, Anthony Treash saying so long and have a nice week.